woman who dressed to disappear, Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy's private wardrobe. In December 2024, Sotheby's auction house in New York put 3 pieces of clothing up for sale: a vintage faux leopard fur coat, a black wool Prada coat, a Yohji Yamamoto jacket. They had belonged to a woman who died 25 years earlier, who never sat for a single fashion interview, who never once explained, on the record, why she dressed the way she did. The 3 pieces sold for a combined $177,600, the Yamamoto jacket alone fetching $66,000, the Prada coat $78,000, nearly 4 times its pre-sale estimate. The consignor was Rosemary Terencio, who had been John F. Kennedy Jr.'s executive assistant at George Magazine and a close friend to the couple. Terencio had kept the pieces for more than 2 decades before deciding to let them go. They were gifts Carolyn had given her personally, not items recovered from an estate. Nobody was buying these coats because they were rare examples of late 1990s ready-to-wear. People who study fashion archives can find better preserved, more historically significant Yamamoto and Prada elsewhere for far less money. They were buying proximity. They were buying a fragment of a woman who spent the last 3 years of her public life doing something almost nobody in her position has ever successfully done. She made herself difficult to see. Let's be clear, this isn't about fashion history. This is about a woman who knew exactly what clothes could do and used that knowledge, photograph by photograph, to build herself armor. Before she was Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy, she was Carolyn Bessette, a publicist working in the press office at Calvin Klein. She joined the company in the late 1980s and rose by the early 1990s into a visible role inside one of the most influential fashion houses in America. This part of her biography matters more than most coverage of her has ever treated it. She was not someone who married into proximity with fashion. She worked in the middle of the very fashion that produced American minimalism, the look that would define the decade. Calvin Klein in the early 90s was the house of clean lines, neutral palettes, and the deliberate absence of decoration. Kate Moss, Christy Turlington, the heroin chic controversy of 1994 to 1995. Carolyn Bessette managed all of it. Colleagues who spoke to Women's Wear Daily and Vogue between 1994 to 1997, during and just after her time at the company, described her not as someone who simply wore fashion well, but as someone who understood how fashion works. She had an eye for fit, for proportion, for the specific kind of restraint that the Calvin Klein aesthetic demanded. She wasn't decorative. She was precise. Here is the detail worth sitting with. The woman who showed up to work at Calvin Klein, dressed in the brand's own clean, structured, exposed silhouettes, slip dresses, fitted tailoring, narrow lines, is barely recognizable as the same woman who would later walk past photographers on Madison Avenue in oversized coats and dark glasses with her head tilted down. That's not a contradiction. That's the hinge this entire story turns on. At Calvin Klein, visibility was the job. Fit, line, and exposure were the products. She was paid, in effect, to be seen clearly, to model the brand's philosophy and how she carried herself through industry rooms and events. In September 1996, after she married John F. Kennedy Jr., visibility stopped being a professional asset and became, almost overnight, a permanent condition she could not turn off. The same fashion fluency she'd built at Calvin Klein didn't disappear. It got repurposed. She took the tools of someone who understood proportion, fabric weight, and silhouette, and instead of using them to be seen, she began using them to not be. If you go back through the AP Wire photograph archive, the dated, time-stamped photographs taken by news photographers on New York sidewalks, between 1996 and 1999, a pattern emerges that's almost too consistent to be accidental. The palette narrows: black, charcoal, navy, camel. On the rare occasions she allows color in it all. A camel Prada coat, in fact, would later become one of the single most recognizable clothes she owned. Almost nothing bright, almost nothing patterned, almost nothing that would catch a viewer's eye from across a street the way a magazine editorial is designed to. The silhouettes get larger, oversized coats, several inches of fabric beyond what her frame required, hems past the knee, collars that could be popped up around the jaw and throat. Where the Calvin Klein years show fitted lines that follow the body, the post-1996 paparazzi archive shows fabric that obscures it, structure used as a wall, not a frame. And then there are the sunglasses. Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy is one of the most consistently sunglass-wearing public figures of the late 1990s, in a media environment that had no shortage of them. But what's notable isn't just the frequency, it's the size. Oversized, often dark-lensed frames that cover a significant portion of the upper face, deployed regardless of weather, regardless of season, regardless of whether she was photographed in direct sun or in the shadowed entrance of a building. This is not how someone dresses when sunglasses are a style choice. This is how someone dresses when sunglasses become a tool to deny a long lens camera, a clean shot of the eyes, which are, for any photo editor selecting an image for print, the single most valuable element of a candid photograph. Fashion journalists at the time, and biographers since, including Elizabeth Beller, whose 2024 biography, Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy, draws on interviews with people close to her, have characterized this period not as Carolyn developing a style, in the way that phrase usually gets used, but as Carolyn building a system, a repeatable, low-variation uniform that she could put on quickly, that gave photographers as little usable material as possible, and that, almost as an accidental byproduct, became one of the most imitated looks of the decade. That's the paradox worth pausing on. The harder she tried to disappear, the more visible the attempt itself became. Fashion press began writing about her minimalism specifically because it photographed as deliberate, even though by every account from people who knew her, said it was born from necessity, not ambition. She wasn't trying to set a trend. She was trying to survive a kind of attention that had no precedent in her own life before 1996. There is one image, more than any other, that fashion writers return to when they talk about Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy and clothing as defense rather than display. It's a photograph widely circulated and reproduced across fashion media for years afterward of Carolyn using a handbag, identified in most retrospective coverage as Hermès, not as an accessory, but as a physical shield, raised to block a photographer's direct line to her face. This single image is frequently cited in retrospective fashion history coverage as a moment that shaped how that bag came to be perceived, not because she was endorsing it, not because Hermès had dressed her for an event, but because the photograph captured something raw, a woman using an enormously expensive fashion accessory as a barrier against being photographed at all. It is worth being precise about what this moment was not. It was not styling. Nobody chose that bag for that photograph. There was no stylist, no campaign, no intention to communicate taste. It was, by every account, a reflexive act of self-protection, the same instinct that makes anyone raise a hand, a newspaper, a coat collar, against an intrusive camera. The difference is that when Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy did it, the object in her hand happened to be one of the most coveted bags in the world, and the moment got photographed, wired, printed, and eventually mythologized as a fashion statement. That's the cost of being misread. an act of genuine distress. A woman trying to walk from her car to a doorway without her face ending up in tabloids the next day got reprocessed by the fashion industry into an aspirational image. The bag got more famous, she did not get more privacy. So if the public wardrobe, the one documented in thousands of paparazzi frames, was built for concealment, what then did Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy actually love privately when there was no camera? The Sotheby's December 2024 sale, though small, gives us a genuine data point, because these 3 clothes weren't selected for a public appearance. They were simply what she owned, then gifted to someone close to her, who in turn kept them for over 2 decades. The faux leopard fur coat, which Carolyn bought at a Parisian flea market, stands out immediately because it directly contradicts the all-black, all-neutral caricature that most retrospective coverage of her repeats. Animal print is not a hidden fabric. It is not designed to disappear into a city sidewalk. It suggests that, away from the specific tactical demands of being photographed mid-stride on Madison Avenue, she was willing to wear something with genuine personality and visual boldness. The Yohji Yamamoto jacket, double-breasted, with padded hips and a cinched waist, worn to the 1997 Municipal Art Society Gala honoring Robert De Niro, tells a different story, one about taste rather than camouflage. Yamamoto in the 1990s represented a specific strand of avant-garde Japanese design, a symmetry, deconstruction, an intellectual relationship to clothing that had nothing to do with mainstream American fashion's preoccupation with body and sex appeal. Owning Yamamoto signals someone whose private taste ran toward designers respected within the industry rather than designers chasing magazine covers. The kind of choice a former Calvin Klein insider, fluent in the difference between commercial fashion and serious fashion, would make for herself, not for an audience. The black Prada wool coat worn to Bill Clinton's 1997 inauguration rounds up the trio. Prada under Miuccia Prada in the mid to late 90s was in the midst of redefining what ugly chic and intellectual minimalism could mean, a register entirely different from the body-conscious Calvin Klein aesthetic she'd spent years inside professionally. A second, much larger auction is worth examining here, since it's frequently conflated with the Sotheby's sale in casual online coverage. In February and March 2026, an auction platform called The Fashion Auctioneer, run by Lucy Bishop, the same specialist who had handled the original Sotheby's sale, ran a 24-lot auction titled Exceptional Fashion, including items from the wardrobe of Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy. The sale totaled $408,750. But only 4 of those 24 lots were genuinely Carolyn's own. 3 Prada pieces, a camel coat, a camel car coat, and an eggshell white wool coat, plus a Yohji Yamamoto little black dress, all gifted to Rosemary Terenzio. Those 4 items alone accounted for $253,875 of the total. The remaining 20 came from a private collector who had sourced similar era pieces from an eBay seller back in 2017 and which had separately been used as wardrobe reference for the 2026 Hulu and FX series Love Story. The camel Prada coat, alone visible in paparazzi photographs of Carolyn walking the couple's dog in 1997 and 1998, sold for $192,000, setting a new auction record for a single garment of hers, nearly 15 times its original high estimate. Treating all 24 lots as authenticated, Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy pieces is a factual error that has spread across secondary coverage, and it's worth flagging precisely because her real wardrobe has already accumulated so much myth that separating verified fact from inflated narrative is part of honoring what she actually was. What's left when you strip the exaggeration away is small but telling. 3 confirmed clothes at Sotheby's in 2024, 4 more at the 2026 sale, 7 verified pieces total, out of what was presumably a much larger personal wardrobe, most of which has never surfaced publicly. A leopard coat, an avant-garde Japanese jacket and dress, a trio of Prada design dresses, chosen in private by a woman who spent her public life in deliberate, protective neutrality. The contrast is the entire point. In public, armor. In private, evidently, a woman with real, specific, sometimes daring taste, exercised on her own terms, away from the lens that had reshaped almost every other decision she made about clothing for 3 straight years. On July 16, 1999, Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy boarded a small plane in New Jersey, piloted by her husband, headed for a family wedding on Martha's Vineyard. Her sister, Lauren Bessette, was also on board. The plane went down off the coast near Aquina that night. There were no survivors. The last widely circulated photographs of her taken in the preceding days show the same uniform the AP archive had documented for nearly 3 years. Dark, fitted but loose clothing, sunglasses, the posture of someone who had, by necessity, become an expert at moving through public space while giving almost nothing away. It is worth noting that the woman most remembered today for an aesthetic, a look, endlessly referenced in style retrospectives, mood boards, and modern minimalist fashion coverage, 25 years later, built that aesthetic largely as a defense mechanism, not as a statement, not as a brand, as a way of getting through a door, into a car, down a sidewalk, with as little of herself given to strangers as the situation allowed. The 3 coats that sold at Sotheby's in December 2024 for $177,600 combined are not really fashion artifacts. They are what's left of someone who spent the most photographed years of her life trying, with real skill and real consistency, not to be seen, and who, 25 years after her death, still is.
Thank you everyone so much for watching Cultured Elegance. If you'd love to support the channel, you can become a channel member today by clicking Join at the bottom of the screen. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.